Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your technical questions answered, and contribute to the community forum. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our construction tech or weekly global Passive House showcase webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand.
And I'm Zack Semke, coming to you from Seattle, Washington.
It's second day of spring for me in Auckland here, Zack. It's end of winter.
Congratulations. How do you measure that? How does that work?
Well, it's the first of September is the first of spring.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, it's one of those logical things that we do down here, along with Celsius and the metric system.
So you don't ascribe to the theory that the spring equinox is the beginning of spring?
No, but I do appreciate equinox. Yes. Yeah.
Well, cool. Today this is the congratulations on spring. That must be exciting.
It's quite nice to get through winter.
Yeah.
I have to say that 2022 winter, there was bad things predicted, but it's we've arrived. We're okay.
Yeah, good. Yeah, it's the last week of summer vacation for our kids.
Yeah.
So school starts next week, which is wonderful. It's great.
As a parent.
Yes.
Yeah. Nice. All right. Well, let's get into this week's episode. We've got a great interview with a builder this week. Always happy to talk to builders who get to work on some pretty cool passive house projects and some other news. But let's say a quick thanks to our supporters.
Yeah, absolutely. So a big thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingwe Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minitaire All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification Units, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Rockwell North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Thank you too to our champion sponsors, Icon Windows and Doors and Proseco. And thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
All right. A little bit of Passive House news from this week. I came across a story about a house, a modest house in Queensland in Australia, and it's for sale. It's a certified passive house. According to the article here, they're estimating it's only the third passive house to be sold in Australia. It says there are currently about 52 registered actual certified passive houses, and it's interesting seeing passive houses being sold, because that doesn't happen very often because people love them, so they don't want to move out of them. But it's an important milestone, I think, because what it does is help start to establish a baseline of value for a passive house. And one of the main features of this passive house is it doesn't look like anything different. It looks like a regular house. But I love one of the articles, sort of some real estate articles, and one of the headlines makes quite a big deal of the fact that the house can be heated with a hairdryer. Now, I suspect part of that's the fact that the heat load in Queensland is relatively low. It's a sort of warm, tropical kind of climate. But needless to say, it does get cooler in winter. So I really like seeing how the features of passive house get marketed, because there's, real estate websites are some of the best or worst marketing that you can see. So it's really interesting to read how something like Passive House, which we talk about in our community quite scientifically, how that gets pitched to the market in general from the real estate sector. So, really highlighting the how small those energy bills are, and the health and the efficiency of that building. So great little project. I have actually interviewed Scott Stewart on the Homestyle Green podcast of Lab Design, and there's a few people, common names that are associated with this, as there are with a lot of the Passive House projects in Australia. Claire Parry from Now's at Hip versus Hype, she was the certifier for this project. Scott Stewart of Lab Design was the designer, and the builder was Nathan Peters. You can check it out. It is on the Passive House Institute database, and I'll put some links up so you can see some of the great real estate photos that are currently listed. So all the best to that. I hope it sells for lots and lots of money.
Indeed.
Yeah.
It should. So much value there.
Yeah.
Well, very cool. My piece of news is Passive House adjacent again, but is exciting because we're definitely feeling the sense of momentum in the realm of climate action and climate legislation. So, we had the big federal bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, that was adopted recently that involves, over, nearly 400 billion in investments in climate, in a clean energy transition. And now, just last night, California approved a wave of aggressive new climate measures. So they're investing $54 billion in climate spending in the state of California, and that's really exciting. So this is, according to the New York Times, legislators approved this record $54 billion in climate spending and passed a sweeping new restrictions on oil and gas drilling, as well as a mandate that California stop adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere by 2045. So some of those sweeping new restrictions include that new oil wells can't be within 3,200 feet of homes and schools, which it kind of blows my mind that an oil well could be closer than that.
Are right next to an oil well?
Yeah, but so it's the Inflation Reduction Act is estimated to bring us to 40% below or 40% reductions in greenhouse gas emissions in the U.S. by 2030, which is so. In order to get all the way to our goal of 50% reduction by 2030, we need to see ambitious local and state action. So it's cool to see this happen right on the heels of the passage of the federal bill.
That is very cool, because it is often those more local actions that are going to actually impact people and take effect. So you hear these massive numbers from the big federal legislation, which is great, but how that impacts people on the ground and in their daily life probably comes more down to those more local policies and rules. So it's cool to see that starting to happen, and things like that definitely put carbon on the agenda. It keeps people talking about it, and that in turn will have to have an impact on the building industry.
Yeah, and it's unclear exactly how that'll play out in California. I don't think there's much like specific building related stuff in the legislation, but you're right. Like if their commitment is to be net zero by 2045, that means significant progress is necessary in buildings.
I mean, if it requires to be not adding more carbon to the atmosphere, that's going to impact everything that might do that, and so you can't not do a building and take that into account.
Yeah, and just California also just announced that it will phase out sales of internal combustion engine vehicles by 2035. There are a whole bunch of states who peg their fuel emission standards to California, including the state of Washington. I think there are 12 states in total that will automatically kind of or relatively automatically adopt that. So
Right.
there's movement all over the place right now, and it's really not a moment too soon, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Good stuff. Well, let's get into this week's interview.
Yeah.
I caught up with Terry Bryers, thanks to Simon Cater, Proclaimer, who helped organise this interview. This project, one of the projects that Terry's been involved in, is probably one of the most significant and impressive EnerPHit projects. It's probably one of the first, I think, EnerPHit projects in New Zealand. And through that process, Terry Bryers has become a certified passive house builder. And he's an experienced builder prior to that. And I love hearing from builders like Terry who have come across passive house and then realized the value of their craft and the mastery that they get to use on a project like this. There's so many challenges involved with pulling an existing building apart. And Daryl Sang was involved in this as the architect as well. And I know that he did many, many site visits because unlike a build from scratch, it's always evolving and changing when you discover new things, when you pull off a piece of the existing cladding and then you have to come up with a new solution. And it requires a really good relationship with the builder, the architect, and a lot of the other tradespeople working on site, and often the owner as well, because everything changes the budget. Now, in this particular case, the budget didn't seem to be much of an issue, which has led to a very impressive result from an aesthetic point of view. But I think going forward, Terry has now set up his own company to focus on passive houses and high performance homes, probably a little bit more in the realm of the everyday budget. So I caught up with Terry and had a bit of a chat about his journey and a couple of these specific projects, but also generally how he has embraced passive house in his work. All right. Well, thank you. Today I'm joined by Terry Bryer from Terry Bryer, really, from your soon to be launched new company as a passive house builder, and also back with us is Simon Cater from Proclaimer. So thank you, Simon, for hooking up this chat on a relatively brisk morning in Auckland. It's a bit chilly out there today, but no doubt nice and warm. It looks pretty cozy where you are, Simon.
Yes, I'm nice and cozy. What have we got? 22.6 degrees at the moment here.
Nice. And about 7 or 8 degrees outside.
Yeah, I think it was about 6 this morning when I left Beachlands.
Terry, you're not in a passive house, are you?
I'm actually living in part of my new build. So this is the double garage.
Right.
I've got my office in here, but it is probably 75% passive.
Right.
So I do have a ventilation system in here, but because of the garage door, I was never going to get air tightness. But this building is built with eco block, and we've done quite a lot of passive work on this part of, because it was a temporary living situation. There are not a lot of windows in this, so I put in a ventilation system.
Yeah. Tell us about let's go back to how you got into building in the first place.
Well, I was born with a hammer in my hand, basically. Ever since I was a kid, I've been building tree huts, boats. I'm a boatie, but I'm a builder at heart. So I went to Australia for quite a few years and did a lot of commercial work over there. All sorts of work over there, and came back here and then started my own business with a partner, which lasted 5 years, and then went out on my own. So I've been on my own for about 30 years, since I was 30 years old. So, and started getting quite frustrated with building styles and quality. And then we went through quite a few downturns, and I noticed that the cheap builds were still going through the downturns. I thought, that's not right, because we're out trying to keep going with doing all the rubbishy jobs just to keep your head above water.
Yeah.
And I thought there must be a better way, maybe to specialize. So then I started Googling, because I had plenty of spare time, and looking around. And then I found Passive House on Google and started reading about it. And I thought, yes, this is great. This is exactly what I'm looking for. And so then I found a company in New Zealand that was called eHouse, and contacted them, and I became their first licensee with their company. And I was there for 10 years. In that time, I did a big build in rural Auckland here, which was a 600 square metre build, my first Passive House build. And I had a pretty good idea of what the criteria was. The 5 points of Passive House is the basic criteria. And keeping that in mind, and as we move forward, getting everybody, in sync to what we were trying to do, all the sub-trades. And we actually we finished up with a really good result. I think we held the New Zealand record for air tightness at 0.288 for a 600 square metre building. I thought was pretty good. And the owners of that building, they went the full hog, and they went for zero energy. So they built a greenhouse out the back of the house, and they put solar panels on the whole roof of the greenhouse. I think it was like 8 meters by 5 meters. So the whole roof was solar panels.
Yeah.
And so they got zero energy classification for their Passive House. And then I moved on to another really interesting.
That was an eco block construction as well.
Yes, it's eco block. Yes.
Yeah. And did that make it easier or harder to make it airtight?
Eco block, it's like everything in construction. I think there's a process, and once you know and get the feel for that process, eco block. The trick with eco block is the first course that you lay has to be perfectly level both ways. So the length of the block and the width of the block, we shoot every course, the first course with the dumpy level. So every block is laid to the millimetre. And once you've done that, then the rest of it is basically just a jigsaw puzzle. Everything goes up plumb. The blocks are made to the millimetre.
Yeah.
So construction is actually very quick and quite easy.
Yeah.
Quite scary when you're filling them with concrete, because they rattle around a bit. But yeah, it's a good product.
So they're polystyrene hollow blocks, right?
Yeah.
And then stack them on top.
Yeah. Solid filled with concrete.
And then pump the concrete inside.
Yeah.
And so you've got good insulation on the outside as well as the inside.
Yeah. So you've got 65 mil polystyrene both sides, solid filled with concrete. Then you have an insulated footing, and then you have insulated under slab.
Yeah.
But the good thing about that product is you've got air tightness with that product as well. So you've got insulation, you've got air tightness, you've got a really strong structure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no need for membranes, but I think ProClimate was still pretty involved in that project, Simon.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember meeting with Terry. Was one of the first builders that I met with when I started with ProClimate about 7 years ago, and it was really good to work with Terry, and he taught me a lot about eco block.
Right.
And it was really good experience.
So your what was your input on that build, or ProClimate's input?
So we were talking about mainly the connections. So connections to windows. I believe, Terry, you would have used the ProClimate window tapes, And the ceiling, I just remind me, Terry, what did we do with the ceiling there?
Yeah, we used Orcon quite a lot, where the ceiling airtight wrap met the walls. We Orconed onto the block width, because where the blocks join, you've got vertical butts. And so it was a matter of getting a good tight seal against those butts. So we used the Orcon product.
And so you had Intello as the membrane for the ceiling as well. So your walls are airtight by virtue of the concrete in the eco block, taping around the windows to get a seal there, and then sealing up the roof. And it was concrete floor, concrete slab.
Concrete base floor, and mid floor was timber.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So there's some junctions there as well.
Yeah. So we didn't need to worry, because the eco block went right the way past the immediate junction. So the floors basically butted into the block walls on the interior. Yeah. So it's the ceilings and the windows basically.
Yeah. It is a beautiful house, that one. And I know that Harper has recently built a second dwelling on that, a minor dwelling on that site. I think he's done it himself, and to a near passive house standard, because he's been so impressed with the results from that one.
Right. Yeah.
So that was a big challenge, big jump in the deep end into passive house, building a very large and quite it's a multi-generational home as well. So there's lots going on there. Right. I think there were 2 kitchens in there, and it's a big place, big project.
It wasn't the size of the house that was the tricky part. It was just being the first build, because a lot of builds have been around 600 square meters. So I wasn't daunted by the size at all. That wasn't the problem. It was really just the devil was in the detail. That was the daunting part, I guess.
And so where to from there?
Nothing major between there and then the one I've just finished, which we ended up going for EnerPHit. So it was an existing building that the original idea was the owner just wanted to put just do a basic quick fix up. So we're going to remove some windows and put in passive house windows and do some installation, which I was advising and was not a great idea, until we started to do a bit of demolition, and then we found mold on the inside of the building, mainly in the closed roof cell area. It was a flat roof with a cavity, basically.
Yeah.
There had been no cross ventilation between the sophites. So it was basically closed up. There was no airflow in there at all. And so the dew point inside that roof was inside the roof.
Yeah.
Between the insulation and the underside of the plywood of a flat roof. So the rafters had a lot of mold on them. And once we exposed that, the owner, who has autoimmune sickness, and he is sure that he got it from when he was doing his university studies in Melbourne, living in the old buildings over there. And Melbourne's colder than what it is here in Auckland.
Mm-hmm.
And he then decided, no, I think we're going to have to go an extra mile here. So Jason Quinn was involved, and then it was put through PHPP and Passive House system through Jason, and we got Sang Architects involved, and so then we decided to go full EnerPHit, and this is the first certified EnerPHit in New Zealand.
First one in New Zealand, and it's quite the house.
Yeah. So the owner decided to. I said to him, "Well, look, at the end of the day, are we doing this for yourself, or are we doing it to sell?" And he said, "No, I'm doing it for myself." And I said, "Well, it might cost you, but when we're finished, you're going to sit down and you're going to really enjoy what you've got," which is what I say to all clients, actually.
Yeah.
And the more involvement they can have, the better the more involved they will feel when the job's finished.
Yeah.
And most people are like that. After 2 years, they come back and say, yeah, well, that was a really good journey. Although it is very stressful, it can be very stressful, but it can be a lot of fun as well. The fun side is always the best part.
And that was it was a long journey as well. That's been quite a
3 years.
I mean, we had a pandemic, but there are other challenges.
Yes, that's right, yeah. So
it's a little way out of the site is a little way out of Auckland.
Yes,
but just I've seen this house has been the subject of a number of presentations at various Passive House hui and I think even conferences, and I've seen presentations given by Daryl Sang and Jason Quinn, because there's so much going on there with everything from re-leveling I think you raised the roof and repitched.
Yeah, we had to repitch the roof because of the cladding system that was put on the roof.
Yeah.
I think the roof was 2-degree pitch.
Yeah.
And the torch-on bitumen system was a 3-degree pitch. So we had to repitch over the top of the existing roof.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of rippings that were glued and screwed down and then plied over the top of that again. Yeah.
There can't be much of the original house there with there.
Oh, no, there's still it is absolutely. It's still the original house.
The original structure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the whole thing is concrete block and concrete floors. So basement floor, concrete blocks right to the very top floor where the roof sits on top of the walls.
Yeah.
And intermediate floor is concrete.
But you put a new lid on it, wrapped it all up, and redid pretty much all of the inside.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the whole thing.
Did you? So you externally insulated?
Yes, that's right. Yes, this was a little bit contentious at the beginning because we were thinking, how the heck are we going to make this airtight? This was before Jason Quinn was involved. And as you know, like any internal partitions, you need to wrap behind the partition so you can join onto the wrap when you continue, like the ceilings or the walls, when you're continuing with your airtight wrap. But because the walls were already in, we couldn't wrap to them. So, and then Jason Quinn came on board and he said, well, look, it's got solid plaster on the outside of the building with paint. So we're going to use that as our airtight layer. He said, you can't use blocks because they've got too many holes in them where the blocks are joined. And so that was his decision to use the plaster, the plaster render on the outside of the building as the exterior airtightness layer.
Right.
Mm.
And did that still involve some taping from the inside to make sure that there was a continuous line of airtightness around the interior?
The difficulty was where any internal framing protruded past the that plaster line. So if like at midway on one of the elevations was a canopy roof, which went out over the entranceway. And so, and also where the roof sits on top of the block wall perimeter, external perimeter, all of the timber framing that protruded through from the inside to the outside, which formed the soffits. So the soffits were 1 meter wide.
Right.
Where all of that timber came through into the soffits, we put gussets around every rafter.
Wow.
And then we infilled between the rafter with a piece of plywood. Yeah. And we painted everything. And then we taped onto the plywood roof structure, taped from the plywood down onto our piece of gusset ply. And then between the rafter and the gusset, we taped down there and then around every rafter and then down onto the blockwork with... We use, I don't know how many boxes of Tescon Varna. We must have used, Simon would remember, maybe 4 boxes I don't know how
There was
many
a lot of
rolls
tape.
were in a box, maybe 20 rolls in a box. But I had one of my guys taping all the external protrusions for probably a month.
Wow.
Yeah, one guy for at least a month.
Yeah, I do. I think you went out to site quite a few times, didn't you, Simon?
Yeah, that's right, Matthew. It was a real eye-opener to see the amount of effort that Terry and the team put in there to get those airtight connections between the wall and especially the underside of the plywood in the roof. So that was a huge job. And also there was an area in the ceiling where underneath the membrane roof on one of the decks, there was a combination of Intello as well as ventilation. So there was actually forced air ventilation going through that area to ensure that any moisture that formed in that space was removed. So Terry's done a fine job on this. I can honestly say that I know that the project's recently been sold. So it's interesting that, Terry, you said that he'd originally been set on building itself for himself, the owner, but decided to sell in the end.
Yeah.
It sounds like a bit of a change of circumstances. I mean, it is a pretty amazing house. It's very unique, and it's got a lot of unique features. I guess that's part of the challenge of doing a retrofit is dealing with all that detail and intricacy.
In the end, it wasn't the detail was actually the easy part, because that's what we do, construction. You understand what has to be done to make it to perform to that. The problem we had with when we did the final blower door test was the joinery. The joinery, we had a lot of problems with the joinery. We also, the owner decided to put in a fireplace.
Right.
So
always a good idea in a passive house.
Yeah. So it had its own air in and its own air out. So it was isolated. But the actual firebox itself, where the door closed, there was a lot of I had to try and get that thing nice and tight. And we had problems with electronic dampers. So we had electronic dampers on the hood range in the kitchen. So the dampers were electronically closed or opened. But when I looked down into the damper, the pivot pins, there was a gap between the pivot pins and the actual and the seal that went around the circumference of the damper. The damper's round. So there must have been probably a 20 mil gap either side of the pivot pin before the seal was. So there was air just pouring in, and it was one of those things. They were installed. And they had been sold to us as airtight dampers. Yeah, but those were the problems that we had, not the actual structure.
I think that's a really interesting point about something being sold to you as something, and it would not be necessarily easy to pick up. Obviously, you looked at that in detail, but a lot of people would just put that in, patch it all up, and then once you had discovered, come along with the blower door later on, that would be really hard to fix, because that's kind of in the middle of a pipe buried in a wall.
Yeah, the windows were very difficult because the supplier had gone into liquidation, so we were left holding the bag basically. But I was able to adjust. There were adjustments on the windows and doors that we could alleviate that problem.
Yeah.
But the dampers was something that couldn't really do much about. So
given that is such a unique project, what do you take away from that, and what's transferable to other projects, either retrofits or even new builds?
Componentry is a big one, definitely. Structural wise, I don't have a problem with structure, but componentry is a problem, definitely. Right. Yeah, I think that's the big one.
Yeah. And I guess I've, like I said, I've spoken to Daryl and the team and Jason a little bit as well. And I guess getting people like that involved early on, were they part of the process of finding components and problem solving?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Like
and I think they probably too would take that on board, from this project. That componentry is a big one.
Yeah.
That can make or break you, definitely. With the air test, that's the big one.
What's your general outlook now? You mentioned before that decade or so into your building career, you were a little bit disheartened perhaps by what you saw. How do you feel about being a builder now?
Well, I decided that I needed to specialize, and so that's what I've done. And I feel like I'm way ahead of everybody else. I think this passive house has changed the whole building ethos for me. I think what it does is it actually because you know what you have to achieve, it puts you in a different headspace. You're not just throwing a structure together. You're actually you're being quite finite about the way you do it. So what it does is it actually makes you a better builder. I think it makes you more responsible, and then it gives you a lot of satisfaction at the end.
Nice.
Huge amount of satisfaction compared with other builds. Now that I look back in retrospect, you build a structure and then it's too cold, so then they've got to add heating, and then it's too hot, so they've got to add cooling. There's too much sun, so then they've got to put shading. Whereas all of this is encompassed before you even build.
Yeah.
So it's a fantastic system. It's absolutely sold. Absolutely.
Awesome.
I think what we need to do, what's missing now is builders quality, I think, is something that really needs to be looked at. And what's the word? Accountability. Having someone, like in the old days, there was like 2 carpenters to 1 apprentice. Nowadays, there's no carpenters. They're all apprentices trying to be carpenters without anybody teaching them what to do. It's what I'm seeing, and I'm seeing a lot of.
But also, you've got that mindset of the big red door coming on site at some stage, as opposed to just having to pass a building inspection from the council where they come along and check that something's there. If you know in the back of your mind that at some point someone's going to turn up and turn a fan on, and they're going to give you a number, and it's either going to be above or below, and if it's above, you failed. So that's a different mindset from someone just coming along with a clipboard and checking that something's there, and then going away again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
How many blower door tests were there on that project?
I did an initial one before I think we were halfway through joinery, and we had a 0.8. EnerPHit is 1 cubic meter. So we had a 0.8. So I thought, yes, we're going to do better than this. But because of the componentry, which hadn't been put in at that stage, we ended up with a 1. So we were very lucky.
Got to be.
It was over. We were over by not much, but enough to be over. So there was a lot of work put into trying to alleviate that problem.
Yeah.
And Terry, you bought your own blower door during that process, didn't you?
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Test your own work.
So it's absolutely brilliant. Yeah, I can test as much as I like. It's great.
Yeah.
So I've got one more official test to do, and then I'm certified with ATMA blower door tester. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Hey, well, thank you, Terry, for telling us all about your journey and your story. And I gather that it's it's not stopping here. There's onwards and upwards, more to come, more projects to work on.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it.
And a lot more work for you, Simon. Hopefully you get to do a few more site visits on projects like that.
Oh yes, I always enjoy working with Terry. He's got a really well-skilled team, and they take real care when they're installing the tapes and things, which is what it's all about. And I like the point he made about sitting the subbies down, because that's often an issue we see, where the builder might be really careful of the air tightness layer, but the subbies come on board and they're not well aware of what's going on. And this can really cause a lot of problems down the line if they make a hole in the air tightness layer somewhere and are not aware of the ramifications of that.
Yeah. Great stuff. All right. Hey, well, thank you both. Great to chat. And we'll keep an eye out for your future EnerPHit and Passive House projects, Terry.
Yeah. Look forward to it.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Thanks, Matthew.
Terry Bryers there, who is a certified passive house builder based here in Auckland. What do you think, Zack?
Oh, it was a great interview, and not to belabor the point, but here is another example of the big Great Recession and economic downturns driving someone to discover passive house and specialize, I guess. It was really inspiring to hear him talk about how he feels like that discovery of passive house means that he feels like he's ahead of everyone else, he has this whole different headspace that he brings to his work thanks to that training.
And I've talked about this before as well. I love coming across experienced builders who discover passive house and realize the value of their work. And they've sort of got all this experience working and learning as a master craftsman, and that isn't necessarily valued if you're just building stock standard homes to the minimum requirements of the building code.
Right.
But if you're doing something that requires attention to detail, and you've got to hit a certain air tightness target, then it requires skill. And to do that on an existing building where you're continually problem solving with existing issues, then that requires a whole nother level of skill. And I'm constantly reminded that I feel like builders are a bit like teachers and nurses. We just don't value them enough. The good ones, because they're so good at what they do and have so much of an impact on the end result.
So true. And right. I mean, in his words, he says that passive house makes him a better builder, a more responsible builder. And lastly, that gives a huge sense of satisfaction. So there's just this pride, this pride in the job well done.
Yeah. And I've seen that too in builders who they fall back in love with building because they have this sense of pride again for what they do, rather than just pumping out another house and moving on to the next one. Yeah.
And I took a look at the images from that EnerPHit project, and sheesh.
Yeah. You want to move in? You want to come?
I'll take it.
It's for sale. Yeah, you can come to New Zealand.
Even with the fireplace, I'll take it.
Just as a little spare home. A little getaway.
Yeah, I mean, the location is looking over this kind of beautiful cove and this forested area, and then it's just breathtaking.
It is a no expense spared project, which is beautiful to look at, and sometimes hard to reconcile what that means for everyone else. But what I take from that is that it puts passive house on the map. It gets stories, it gets people talking about it. And when there are people like Daryl Sang and Terry as the builder out there that are available, then they can do a similar result, a passive house project at a more modest budget. and it just increases the awareness. So I think there is a danger that, if you just keep having lots of these passive house projects, then it can cause people to think, oh, passive house is only for high end. We are countering that. We've got some amazing social housing projects coming online now that are going to help ameliorate that perception. But it does help inspire people as well. It says you can have a beautiful home. There's people in that market are probably going to have a beautiful, stunning house anyway, so they may as well do it as a passive house, and then it can be beautiful and also not require ridiculous amounts of energy, because otherwise it could equally just be a big glass box with a gas fire and be some sort of abomination.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like as the passive house markets kind of develop and mature, and passive house practice expands in these different markets, that the notion that passive house is just for expensive projects for the wealthy, I think it gets dispelled quickly. I mean, because you just see so many affordable housing projects or social housing projects that are so successful and more modest, smaller, single family projects and things. I totally like this project for, spurs learning, and it spurs learning for a single practitioner, but also potentially for the industry. So he came away with a real clear sense, as he was talking about the damper with the fireplace and some other challenges with windows and stuff, and it came away with a real clear sense that there's a challenge with componentry, and that's a message then that can be carried, and identifying an obstacle helps us figure out, okay, how are we going to solve that problem and solve that issue. So this massive and very expensive EnerPHit project still has important contributions to make to the kind of development of the passive house, kind of delivery system.
And kudos to the owner, and also to Daryl Sang and his team at Sang Architects, because I know that they spent a few weekends during Passive House Open Days, and it's a little way out of Auckland. It's it's a sort of an hour's drive west, so a bit of time and giving up weekends to allow people to go and visit and walk through, and that's really the best way to get people to experience what it all means, and all the multiple conference presentations and webinars and other opportunities that have been taken to highlight all that great learning. So pretty cool project, and also great to see that Terry's now seen that there's enough of an opportunity for him to branch out and start specializing in offering his services as a certified passive house builder. That's awesome. We need more of that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, well done, Terry.
Yeah, very good. All right, what do we got going on in passive house world?
Well, for Passive House Accelerator, we are firing up our programming again. So it's now that we're in September. So our first, it's exciting.
Yep, Live's back.
Yeah, definitely. So Passive House Accelerator Live will start on Wednesday, September 7th. So that's September 8th for you folks in Australia and New Zealand. And it will feature a presentation by Lois Arena and Stephen Winter Associates and Mark Ginsberg of Curtis and Ginsberg. And they're going to be providing a Building Energy NYC 2022 conference preview. So they'll be discussing what we've learned from many built multifamily passive houses, and you got a couple of the world's leading practitioners in multifamily passive house to share their insights and to tease up what's going to be coming a couple weeks later or a week later with Building Energy NYC. So let me say a word about that. So NESI, the Northeast Sustainable Energy Association, is a very highly regarded energy efficiency in buildings organization, and also programmer of really top quality events. So they're presenting Building Energy NYC on Thursday, September 15th in New York. And there's I'll share a link for registration for that. Okay, so that's the first Passive House Accelerator Live, and it's related to Building Energy NYC. Then we have on Thursday, we are going to do our first Passive House Component Spotlight of the season. So that's Thursday, September 8th for us. So that's Friday for you in Down Under. We'll be joined by David Funk and Alfred Jury of Euroline Windows, and they're going to be presenting the art and practice of fenestration. This is the first time we've had Euroline share a component spotlight. So I'm really excited about what they have to offer, and the insights they'll share, and also the information about specific Euroline Windows lines. So please join us for that. And there's other stuff happening, of course, and some big conferences coming up in the fall. So we'll include a link to all of that in the show notes.
Awesome. Yes. And don't forget to sign up for the newsletter as well over at the Passive House Accelerator, so that you're always up to date with all that latest information. Great. All right. Well, I think that's it for this week. We'll be back again next week on Passive House Podcast. So thanks for listening in, and thank you, Zack.
Thank you, Matthew. Have a good one.